Welcome everyone to Tales from the 90s, your retro time machine back to my favorite time period, the 90s. This week we're working on episode number 88. We're going all the way back to February of 1997, so let's go. Yeah, last time I was with you, we were in February of 1994, so we went ahead 3 years. I mean, technically we're still going back, but you know what I mean. This will be our 9th trip through the year of 1997, and at this time I was 13 years old and in my first year of 7th grade, because yes, of course, I failed 7th grade. Almost failed it twice. But anyway, before we get going, I do want to mention I got a bonus episode coming out September 26th. It's the last Saturday of September, and it's episode number 24. My bonus episodes can kind of cover anything. Figured this month, I guess technically next month, if you watch this when it comes out, because this is coming out in August. Bonus episode's about literally a month from today. Today, I'm recording this on the 26th, and bonus episode will be out September 26th. Anyway, it's my top 25 comedy movies of all time. Had a lot of fun going through that. Just a personal list I made up of just my favorite comedy movies, some highlights from the movies, and some personal memories and stuff from them. So that'll be fun to check out. But you're here for this. This is the regular episode, and if you've never watched it before, I pick a random month and year from the 90s, and I go back and kind of talk about it in kind of long form. Don't give too much technical information, on each subject, because I cover a lot of subjects on this, but just, personal memories and just to talk about different things, what was going on in the world at the time. We'll start off with some news. Of course, the 90s was definitely full of, from the mid-90s on, of O.J. Simpson stuff. By this time in 97, already had the trial, the sham trial. Well, not really sham, but the bought defense, pretty much. Bought jury, some people say. Where, O.J. was obviously guilty, but of course found not guilty. But on this day, well, not this day, but on this, for this time period, February of 97, February 4th to be exact, O.J. Simpson was found liable, which means he was found guilty, but in a civil trial, so it's not criminal, obviously. He was found liable for the deaths of Nicole Brown Simpson, his ex-wife, and Ronald Goldman, which they always called her friend. I believe only had actually met once, because he was a waiter at a restaurant. They'd met once before, and then he was going over there to return, I can't remember if it was her sunglasses or something, but they made all this stuff about, it was her secret lover or some crap. It was just, just someone that she'd met once that was nice, was taking over her sunglasses, and unfortunately, it happened to be OJ's ex-wife, so he wasn't going to make it, but I'm sure you know all about the OJ case. But anyway, on this day, he was found guilty in civil law, which means he had to pay money. And it was $33.5 million is what he was found liable, the damages. I mean, I don't know how you put damages on people's lives or put a money amount on people's lives and, pain and suffering and stuff like that. But I mean, that's what they have to do, because, that's the whole point. Sadly, the families couldn't get justice that way, but they got it this way. But not really, because as you'll find out, he barely paid anything on this over the years. And it actually had reached $117 million total in, with interest and stuff. Fred Goldman, who is Ronald Goldman's father, actually reached a settlement with OJ's estate after OJ died for like $58 million, not even the full thing he was owed. But since OJ's estate was only worth anywhere between $500,000 to $1 million total, and because brilliant American system here, taxes and fees for people running the estate have to be paid first. Shouldn't be that. It should be the people he's owed for since literally 97. They had to be paid for first. The families end up getting pretty much nothing, just like they have when he was alive. So pretty much a final slap in the face from the grave from O.J. Simpson, the piece of crap murderer. Through the research of this, which I've pretty much watched and read all kinds of stuff. I'm reading a book now on the defense of O.J.'s case. It was actually written in 95, so it was either while the case is still going on, I haven't got to the end yet, obviously, or right after. So I've studied on this and watched all kinds of stuff on this, pretty much on as much as on any case I've, of law history, but I found out something new, which is what I like doing most about these podcasts. I found out is actually learning new things about stuff that happened back then. But found out that sorry, something in my eye. Ronald Goldman's father, Fred, as I said before, had settled for that. Had actually approached OJ after the trial and said that he would offer to not collect on the money if OJ would sign a confession saying he did it. And this, of course, after the criminal trial, so he could have done that and not got tried again because, there's double jeopardy. He can't be tried for the same crime twice. But he didn't do it because, OJ always had to be right. But then he went and wrote a book called If I Did It, which I read that book. He's just full of crap, another money grab. But, yeah, the great O.J. Simpson, I guess he was worth only, $500,000 to $1 million, which I say only, and to me that's obviously a fortune. But for someone like him that had millions and millions and millions of dollars, to him to only have, maybe even less than $1 million was, what he deserved. He deserved actually to be in prison, but that wasn't going to happen. Thank you to his legal team and the idiot mistakes of some of the mistakes of the prosecutors. But like I said, I've been through that on here before, and I'm sure many people know. I mean, I said not everybody knows about it, but I'm not gonna make this the OJ trial podcast because there's been tons of those done. You can go watch the whole trial on Court TV and tons of documentaries and mini-series and movies and books and all that stuff. But yeah, on this, for this month that I'm covering, February of '97, this is when he actually lost a civil trial, but just like with the criminal trial, no justice. Move on to something happier, literally Happy Meal. We'll talk about some kids' meal toys that came out in February of '97. Speaking of Happy Meal, McDonald's obviously being the biggest of those. They came out with the Mighty Ducks pucks, and these were hockey pucks, and they weren't based on the Mighty Ducks that most people are familiar with, the Disney movies. It was the Disney cartoon series, which I know still a lot of people are familiar with that, but the movies were obviously more popular. But if you remember the cartoon series, it was like alien ducks from outer space, like literal ducks, not like the Mighty Ducks being the team name. These were literal ducks. And there was these 4 hockey pucks, and they actually had a little figure on the hockey puck, but you could take it off and play with the figure, and the hockey puck itself was an actual, regulation hockey puck, so kind of like a 2-for-1 toy there. KFC had Marvel superheroes, and these were different things based on some of the Marvel superheroes. Now back then, the Marvel superheroes weren't as, super popular as they are today. These were, during this time, it was mostly, cartoon series and stuff from the comic books. But obviously, in the 90s, comic books were nowhere near as popular as they were back, 50s, 60s, 70s. And even some in the 80s. They were still around, but since TV had gotten so big and so many more channels, pretty much the comic books kind of died off. Of course, my favorite comic books of all time, the horror ones from EC Comics, Tales from the Crypt. And they were done by in the 50s because some dumb senator and some idiot committee he came up with said that they were leading to juvenile delinquency. So they came out with this comics code where it had to have a seal on it, and the stuff in it had to meet the comic code. And it didn't have to have that; you could still sell it. But it was pretty much implied by the government that any store that was selling these things, they weren't like, we're going to shut you down, but it was implied, basically. So that's why they ended up having to cancel them, because they couldn't get all the places like before that were selling them. I don't know why I'm going into all that when I'm talking about Marvel. Obviously that continued. And, comic books have kind of made a comeback, but now the trendy thing is to call them graphic novels. And, instead of calling them comic books, which, when I'm talking about Tales from the Crypt, I have a book, it's up on my shelf. It's complete EC history, or complete Tales from the Crypt history, and it goes from when it started as comic books. And I always wondered why they were called comic books when most of them are stuff like superheroes or the stuff I like, horror. But it's actually, their history is based in actual like comics. You know, they were like, you know, comic strips. That was basically how they started, because that's why they were called comic strips. I always wondered that, because most of the ones I'd ever seen were, like I said, either horror or you know, the most popular was superhero stuff. I was like, okay, where's the comedy? You know, but you know, they were called comic strips when they started, or comic, you know, books, and that's kind of how the name stuck, even though you could just call them superhero books. But anyway, I like to jump around, as you can tell. I'm kind of all over the place. But that's the good thing about this. I'll write out, like, not a script, but different points to talk about, and sometimes I'll just go off on tangents. Well, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes I just freaking ramble all day. But anyway, KFC had these Marvel superhero toys. There was a wall-crawling Spider-Man, which, if you remember those like little things, they would put it on the wall and it would, like, you know, go down like that. There was a Spider-Man symbol clip, which I'm not exactly sure what the clip is. I guess it just clips on anything. Invisible Woman escape launcher. Incredible Hulk. There's an incredible loud vehicle outside. Incredible Hulk pencil twirler. And a Fantastic Four Terracraft. I don't know what that is. It's probably some kind of like vehicle thing. And also a Wolverine press and go trike. You know, it's like a tricycle with Wolverine on it. Not tricycle, but like motorcycle, where you'd press it and it would go. So some pretty cool stuff from KFC there. Pizza Hut had Star Wars posters, because they just re-released The Empire Strikes Back, you know, one of the Star Wars movies from the 70s. I say one of the Star Wars movies in the 70s because the only Star Wars thing I watch is Baby Yoda. I don't like any of the original movies, any of the new movies, any of the other stuff. I know, kill me now. Just was never a fan of Star Wars. But yeah, they re-released that, so Pizza Hut had posters from it. Taco Bell had toys based on the Men in Black movie, which I don't remember if I think it came out the month prior or it came out the month after this, but I definitely remember Men in Black being one of those. You know, we ended up getting the VHS of it, so we didn't have a ton of VHS tapes, so when we got them, we pretty much wore them out over and over again. But yeah, Men in Black was definitely a big hit when it came out. But like I said, Taco Bell had the toys. Hardee's had Hasbro Classic games, you know, based on the Hasbro line of board games, but they weren't actual board games. They were like little mini games that did different things, but they were based on there was Operation, Candyland, Mousetrap, and Battleship. And like I said, they weren't the actual games. They were just like little toys, little mini game type thing, you know, with the theme of that. Arby's had Adventures in Construction. These were like Mega Blocks, if you remember those. Legos were obviously the little, you know, they're still super popular. But if you remember Mega Blocks, they were like made mostly for little kids. They were like the really big, but they weren't Lego brands. So you couldn't, you know, most people called them giant Legos. But yeah, they were different. They were like these construction, like Mega Blocks, and they had a special like top that looked like a roof. So you could like build your own houses, and obviously, you know, the more you went to Arby's, the more you know, a lot of these places don't have the kids meals and stuff anymore. Yeah, so it sounds, most of the ones now is just McDonald's, Burger King, and Wendy's. I mean, I'm sure other places may have them, but that's mostly the ones you think of when you think of kids meals. But back then, a lot of restaurants had them. Like even Long John Silver's had kids meals in. They had the Disney Channel straw hangers. These are like these little 2-inch figures that will attach to a straw and a drink. Those were super popular. They had all kinds of those, but these were Disney Channel ones, you know, because the Disney Channel was super big back then. That's another thing. Disney Channel, obviously, you know, if you have cable, it's on there. It's almost on every cable package. But also, most people, if you know you have Disney Plus, you don't have cable, you got it there. But back in the old days, you know, Disney Plus isn't pretty much a new thing. Back in the old days, Disney was actually one of the channels you had to pay extra for on your cable package. Sort of like with HBO and all those. Disney thought so high of themselves even back then that you had to pay extra money to get Disney. It didn't just come with like that's how Nickelodeon grew a lot. And even Cartoon Network, which came later, but Nickelodeon specifically became known as the first network for kids because they were included in all cable packages. Disney you had to pay extra for, and a lot of houses just wouldn't do it, you know what I mean? Unless you have little kids that have to watch Disney. Most parents weren't paying for the Disney Channel. But like I said, back then they had these little figures. They're called straw hangers. And sorry, there's always stuff in my eye. Talked about my eye stuff before with my blocked tear duct. Some days are better than others. Today is not one of those days. But anyway, they featured figures, little figures from Disney Channel shows. There was Baloo from Tailspin, Scrooge McDuck, obviously from, you know, DuckTales, Dale from Chip and Dale. I don't know why they didn't have Chip, and Goofy, because, you know, Goofy, one of the biggest, you know, Disney characters of all time. But yeah, that was just some kids' meal toys. I'm talking about some books that came out around this time. Obviously, I'm talking about late 90s. Goosebumps is one of the most popular series ever. They were getting towards the end of the original run of Goosebump books, you know, the original series. They were on book number 52 at this point. It was called How I Learned to Fly. It's about a boy who is being bullied, and then he learns how to fly from like a magic book. It was actually the only book, I found out, was the only book in the series that doesn't include like monsters or haunted trying to say objects and items, and it came IJEX. IJEX. It sounds like some Apple product. You want to make a project? Use your new Apple iJect. Anyway, I need something injected in my eye probably because of stupid crap. But anyway, no, they were the first Goosebump book in the original series ever to have no monsters, no haunted objects, no like, you know, that type of stuff. There was a magic book that, you know, make you fly, but that's not technically like, you know, something that's haunted or supernatural as far as like monster type thing. So it was really the first Goosebump book ever to not have that type of stuff. And of course they also had, at this time they were going with the Give Yourself Goosebump book series, which I've been reading through, you know, basically one after another, from getting them from the library. They're the Choose Your Own Adventure books, if you remember those. Those were amazing. I fell in love with those. But at the time, you know, 97, I was in middle school, so I wasn't reading a lot of Goosebump books. You know, it wasn't like the, you know, you remember back in the old days, I don't know how it is in school today, but, you know, elementary school, there would be like the set time of, I can't remember if it was once, I think it was once a week. I don't think it was, yeah, it was once a week. It wasn't every day. Where you would go to the library. I almost said library. Go to the library. It would be during a class, because, you know, back then it wasn't, in our school went to 5th grade, not 6th. I know a lot of schools did. But our school, we had pretty much the same class all day until 5th grade, and then there was 3 different teachers, and, you know, they would break, you know, separate the classes into, like, you know, this teacher had math and social studies, or however it went. But they were doing that to prepare you for middle school, when literally you would get you know, each teacher taught a different class. Well, you know, elementary school, you're used to just being in the one class all day. I don't know how it is now. They might have different teachers for different things. I don't know. And it probably depends on the size of the school district. But anyway, they would, of course, I got a frog in my throat too. They would, once a week, we'd go to the library. And, you know, we get to stay in there. We get to read books in there, you know, check out books. And, you know, stuff like that. And, of course, everybody would run to the Goosebump books. Or check out the Scary Stories to Tell in the Darks for probably the 17th time if there wasn't a Goosebumps they wanted to read. Not everybody, you know. Mostly all the boys wanted the Goosebumps. Not everyone, but mostly. And like half the girls did too. But like I said, by this time I was in middle school, and the library was like I can't remember exactly. I think it was one you had to, like, I think you just go to it like throughout the day. Or maybe they give you a certain time during a free period. I can't remember exactly. But, you know, it wasn't like, you know, we go there every time, you know, you have a certain time for it. It was just to basically go whenever. So, and by that time, you know, I was not really growing out of Goosebumps, but just, you know, I was reading my wrestling magazines when I bought them legally. We won't talk about how I got them. I've talked about that on here before. The cops are like, tell that story one more time, we're going to come after you 30 years later. But anyway, sorry about the frog in the throat. But like I said, I just ramble on, sorry. The whole point of that was to say that by the time they came out with the Give Yourself Goosebumps, I wasn't even aware of it at the time. I didn't become aware of this until I started doing this podcast, basically, and I found those. I was like, wow, they actually have a Choose Your Own Adventure Goosebumps thing, and they're really fun to read. There hasn't been one yet where I get to a good ending, and normally there's only 1 or 2 good endings in these. In the Choose Your Own Adventures, you get a few more, but in the Goosebumps, sometimes there's only 1 or 2. but I haven't been able to read it like just one time and get to the good ending. You know, I'm always like, I'll be reading through these things. Sometimes I'll end up reading the whole thing, because you know, with those, you read and then it tells you skip to this page, and then there'll be choices. Well, anyway, they were on number 14 of this series at the time, The Creepy Creations of Professor Shock. And I haven't got to that book yet. I can't remember which one I'm waiting on, but there's one waiting at the library for me now. I gotta go up there and get, actually. But then they came out with a kind of sub-series of To Give Yourself Goosebumps. I can't remember the title of it right now, but it actually has stuff where there's you would actually write, you have items and stuff, almost like a role-playing game type thing. You get to pick certain like 3 items, and you get to pick this and that, and you'd actually get a piece of paper and write it down, because you know, you'd be crossing stuff out and adding stuff. So I haven't got to those yet. I'm going to do that after I get through this whole series. Hopefully the library has them all. You know, with the modern day libraries now, you know, here in Indiana, I know in Ohio, the Cincinnati Public Library, there's a bunch of those, so they're all connected. But you know, with modern libraries, you can get books from other libraries in your, you know, whatever library system you happen to be in. So hopefully they have them all, because I like to be able to read all those. But they also had at this time the series going, Goosebumps Presents, and this was actually came out after the TV series on Fox started, which was, you know, super popular. I remember when that came out. You know, it was on Friday night, The Haunted Mask, the 2-part series premiere of that. And just like when Power Rangers debuted, they'd hyped it up so long on Fox, and plus Goosebumps had been popular anyway. You know, they basically were the biggest thing at those Scholastic book fairs, if you remember those, where poor kids like me never got to buy anything. But I seen a meme just today where it's like you get $20 from your mom. You know you're going to be going to the Scholastic book fair. You're going to pick out 3 Goosebumps books and a Lamborghini poster, because that was one of the things they had. They had posters of like cars, and all the boys like, oh, I want that car. I never really was a car person, like had car posters on my wall. Most of the posters I had was wrestling or sports sometimes. But anyway, Goosebumps Presents was actually based on the Goosebumps TV show. They were actually just the regular Goosebumps books that had already been out, but they added pictures, and then the cover showed a picture from the series. So, you know, it was basically the same book, but it included pictures from the series. You know, if you're a completionist, you wanted it. And they were on number 9 at this time, which was Go Eat Worms, which is one of the most popular Goosebump books, and you know, from all time basically. But yeah, they were on number 9 of that. Like I said, Go Eat Worms. Speaking of sports, you know, just like last month when I was doing February's, you know, 94, February is not the biggest month for sports. You got back then the Pro Bowl, which actually I just found out today they're stopping there's reports, haven't been confirmed, but it probably gonna be, that they're not having the actual Pro Bowl anymore, which they stopped doing a few years ago, which I get, because, you know, the Pro Bowl, a lot of people, for one, you know, back then it was actually after the Super Bowl, which is smart. But nowadays they want the Super Bowl to be the last game, so they had the Pro Bowl in between, you know, the week in between the championship game, to see who gets to the Super Bowl and the actual Super Bowl. Well, when they started doing that, they found a lot of players wouldn't play, you know, if they're going to be in the Super Bowl, because, you know, why am I going to risk, you know, an injury right before the biggest game of the year? And then they changed it over to, you know, and so they were having like alternates, and it turned out to be, and also a lot of people wouldn't play anyway, because, you know, it's an exhibition game, but people were actually getting hurt in this. And I know there's a lot of people say, oh, back in, you know, the good old days, you know, back in the 90s, they used to be in the Pro Bowl and you didn't worry about getting hurt. Well, you know, it's kind of stupid that players were getting hurt in this game that really meant nothing other than a TV rating. And even then, the ratings weren't like super big for it. So they went to like, they've done a couple different versions, but there's been like, the main thing has been like flag football. Well, now come out today that they're getting rid of the Pro Bowl games altogether, and they're just going to have, the quote was, it was going to, some way to honor the Pro Bowl players or something, like probably some award thing or stuff where they're going to get on stage and talk and nobody's really going to watch it. I guarantee you in a couple years there'll be something coming back with the Pro Bowl. But like I said, the Pro Bowl was going on at this time for the, being February '97. It's for the 1996 season. In this game, the AFC beat the NFC 26-23. This is actually the last Pro Bowl to go overtime, and I guess it will be the last one forever if they continue to not have one in the future. But Mark Brunell, the quarterback of the Jaguars, and of course the AFC, was the MVP. And the main starters for the teams, quarterback Drew Bledsoe for the Patriots, Brett Favre of the Packers, and then wide receivers. Actually, a Bengal made it last week when '94. None of the Bengals made it, because back in those days they didn't give like a pity vote to every team like they have been recently. Where even if you got a horrible team, they'll still have to pick at least one person. Carl Pickens, our wide receiver from then, was a starter, the main wide receiver, which, if he'd have had, 53 other good players around him, the Bengals could have done something, but he was basically the only good player on that team. And then the other wide receiver was Herman Moore for the Lions. Running backs were Jerome Bettis of the Steelers. Being a Bengals fan, I can't stand the Steelers. You'd wonder how I can even stand the Bengals through the 90s, but that's another subject. And then Terry Allen from the Redskins. And another Bengal actually made the team. Defensive back Ashley Ambrose made the team. And then the other sport that happens in February is NASCAR. They get started in February. They have like the longest season of the year of any sport. I don't know if you count like golf. I don't even know when their things are. I'm guessing they don't have any in the winter, but maybe they do. I don't know. Make them play mini golf indoors. That's an actual skill. But anyway, NASCAR held 2 races in February, and they were both won by Jeff Gordon, my favorite driver of all time. Of course, driving the number 24 Chevy Monte Carlo. DuPont was the sponsor. But the very first race of the year is actually the biggest race of the year. You'd think that would be like, it'd be like having the Super Bowl start the season. It's weird. But with NASCAR, they go off points and then a playoff system throughout the year. NASCAR is one of those sports, it's not a typical sport like baseball, football, basketball, hockey, where, only the certain competitors that are competing for the championship are, because it would be kind of boring, I think, even if they narrowed it down to like the top 10, to just have 10 drivers. Although that could be interesting. But say it was like down to 2, like the Super Bowl or something. You wouldn't have just 2 cars out there racing 500 miles to see who wins the championship. Because it could be interesting, but if one of them wrecks, then it's over all of a sudden. That's why they don't. That's why they do points and stuff. But they have the biggest race of the year is the Daytona 500. And it opens the season, and like I said, Jeff Gordon won that, and he won the Goodwrench Service 500 or 400 at Rockingham, and he would with that big of a start, he ended up closing out the year winning the NASCAR championship. It was his second championship, I believe. Next, I want to talk about a movie that came out this month, and normally I reserve this for movies I like, and or just movies I've seen in general. This would be a movie I've seen in general. And speaking of general, it belongs in Dollar General. No, it belongs in Dollar Tree. No, it actually belongs on Wish or Temu, and that is the abomination known as Leprechaun 4 in space. Oh, I hate this movie. You can ask my brothers or anybody that knows me. My kids, I always skip this one. Although sometimes I'll put it on just for laughs. Just like a bad movie like Creepshow 3, that abomination. That's probably the worst movie of ever, Creepshow 3. Leprechaun 4 in space is close to it. Although I would put I'm gonna actually add this, because on my October bonus episode, which will be my 3rd one for October, because my very first bonus episode I actually started in October of 2024, I believe. My top 50 horror movies of all time. This year is going to be my top horror franchises. I'm actually going to include a spot where I'm going to put my worst horror movies of all time, the worst ones that I've seen. But the Nightmare on Elm Street remake would be on there. Not the Friday the 13th remake. I actually like that one. Nightmare on Elm Street 2 I didn't like either. But anyway, Leprechaun 4 in space. As much as the Leprechaun and the Hood movies were annoying, there was a couple funny things in them, but I wouldn't put them in the horrible category of this. Leprechaun 4 in Space was terrible. It was so low budget looking. It included some princess that was evil, and then there was like an evil doctor. It's like, Leprechaun's supposed to be the evil person. You know, why are you adding all these idiots? And even the Leprechaun remake that they did, and then like Leprechaun Revenge, I think, came after that. Even they're not good movies at all. But Leprechaun, I don't know. Leprechaun Revenge, I can't remember which one. It was the Leprechaun that came after the In the Hoods, the one with Hornswoggle, the WWE wrestler, as a Leprechaun. It just really didn't seem like Leprechaun. It was completely different. Warwick Davis is the only one that should ever play Leprechaun, but that's beside the point. Leprechaun 4 in Space, back to that. You know, he's in space, and the CGI on this stuff, like even a bad AI program these days, used by somebody that knows nothing, like an old man that has no idea what they're doing on the internet, I guarantee he could come up with better graphics than this stupid movie. This movie was absolute crap. It was, even the parts where Leprechaun said funny things, it was just, the movie was so bad. It was bad. Coming off Leprechaun 3 in Las Vegas, that movie was hilarious. Now, my favorite one of all time is the second one. The first one was really good too, but I like the second one the best. The third one I would put third. I would put third. But this one, oh, I can't begin to describe it. And my version of Leprechaun 4 was a lot better. And I think I've told this on here before, but I'll do a brief thing of it since I'm taking forever. I gotta go all the way back to when I was a kid, and the lies my dad told me. And I don't mean that in like a negative way. I'm like, oh, my dad was this, or he would just come up with these stories. And as a kid, I would believe them. And even as an adult, I still believe some of them, but still also at the same time, don't know for sure if they're true. But anyway, this one I know isn't. One of my favorite movies, I was just talking about Creepshow 3. Favorite movies of all time was the original Creepshow. You know, Stephen King, George Romero, that movie is a classic. Based on the EC comic books, Tales from the Crypt comic books. And the very first segment was called Father's Day, and had a very young actor in it. You know, I think his second role ever, Ed Harris, which of course, you know, went on to star in many things. He was like in Apollo 13. He was like the commander or mission control guy, whatever, you know, one of the main characters in it. And you know, he's been in a bunch of other stuff. But at this time, he was almost unknown. And my dad told me, and I believed him, that that was him in the movie. That before I was born, he was an actor, but he moved here to you know, because I was born, or basically, I don't know exactly. But I was like, but your last name isn't Harris? And he's like, oh, that's just a stage name they give you in Hollywood. Which, you know, come to find out they do that. But anyway, so I believed this for the longest time. But, you know, eventually I grew to not believe it. You know, once I got in elementary school and my brain formed somewhat. Something that's still debatable these days. But anyway, there was a time in elementary school, I think around 4th grade or something, so it would have been like 94 or something like that, where I was just doing things for attention. You know, I was one of those annoying kids that was like in 5th grade, I got literally sent home from school. Didn't get suspended, but basically suspended for half a day because they were talking about the humpback whale in class, and I kept laughing and joking and just being completely immature. But anyway, that type of crap. So I was, you know, always trying to get attention. But in 4th grade, I started telling people, yeah, my dad's Ed Harris, and I had an answer for everything. It's like, oh, well, why aren't you living in California in a mansion if he's a Hollywood actor? And I was like, oh, well, him and my mom got divorced, and she decided to stay here because her family lives here, and I can't, you know, my dad sends child, like, yeah, okay, if that was true, why am I wearing Payless shoes and freaking, you know, dollar store, not dollar store exactly, but, you know, Kmart clothes. I was gonna say Walmart, but you know, Walmart wasn't even in our area at the time, or if it was, we weren't going to. It was Kmart then. It's like, yeah, my dad's a Hollywood actor, but I'm wearing some Kmart stuff. But anyway, all of a sudden I got the ideas. Oh yeah, and he actually hired me to write a movie. Yeah, a 4th grader, and your dad's an actor. How many? Okay, I guarantee there's plenty of actors have kids in 4th grade. Okay, not one of them. I guarantee not one of them's ever said to their kid, "Hey, you want to write a movie?" Like actors even do that. The dumb stuff that I thought I could like trick people with. And there was a couple kids that actually believed it, I think, is probably what kept me going. Fed my stupid 4th grade ego. But anyway, I'm writing the next Leprechaun movie, because at this point Leprechaun 3 had come out. So I was writing Leprechaun 4, Back to Ireland. And in this movie, Leprechaun was, because at this time, I thought the Leprechaun was the same in every movie, because it was the same actor. Come to find out later, each one is supposed to be different. Because if you look at the stories, like Leprechaun 1, he ends up in the well after coming over from Ireland. Leprechaun 2 is where he has to marry this woman on his 1000th birthday, but the guy sneezes and, he does, you'd have to see the movie to know what I'm talking about. Anyway, he has to wait a whole nother 1,000 years to marry someone in the same family. So obviously, it's a different Leprechaun, but as a kid, I always thought it was the same guy. Anyway, in my version of Leprechaun 4, he's going to go back to Ireland, and I can't remember all the details. I wish I still had this, because I had this whole script written out. Like, even, like, parts, like, names of people. And I had the famous actresses, and, she's going to play this, and he's going to play this, and I was telling some of the kids, like, yeah, you want to audition to be in the movie? And I think I even set up, like, an audition thing for after school, but I had to go home or something. So I didn't get to do it. That would have been interesting if I was trying to have kids audition to be in this Leprechaun movie. If anybody would have showed up. Probably the mental home is where I belong. But anyway, I had this elaborate thing where he goes back to Ireland, and I can't, like, that's the only detail I remember. But even that, I guarantee a movie written by a kid in 4th grade who pretends that his dad's an actor and is writing a script in his little notebook that he should be taking notes in or doing schoolwork in. I guarantee you that, whatever that was, you could find that in the landfill from 30 years ago and put that in a movie, and it would have been better than Leprechaun 4 in space. That's all I got to say about that. Now I'm turning into Forrest Gump. Anyway, let's talk about something that a little more based in reality compared to that. Wrestling. ECW had a few events this month. None of them pay-per-view, but they were still doing their really big events. The first one was called ECW Crossing the Line Again. It was February 1st. And last week I talked about the night the line was crossed, the ECW, where it was like one of the biggest events in history and really got everybody taking notice of ECW at a time when it was just, they'd only been in existence like 2.5 years at the point, if that. They were local to Philadelphia, but they did have some syndication in like other areas. But this is really what put them on the map. Wrestling magazines started covering them more. Well, that's what they based this, the title of this on, Crossing the Line Again. And it was from the ECW Arena, which is in Philadelphia. It's the one they used the most for their shows. And portions of this event were broadcast over 2 different episodes of their TV show called Hardcore TV, which was on our local channel at the time, Channel 25. It was a local, like, low-watt broadcast. WBQC was the call letters. But sometimes it'd be on at like 4 in the morning. They would move it around sometimes. It'd be hard to tell. I think it was like 4 in the morning on Tuesday or something like that. Until it got more popular, then they started putting it at like 8 o'clock, 10 o'clock at night. But anyway, it's notable for several reasons, this event. First, it was announced by Paul Heyman, of course, the owner of ECW, that ECW would finally have its very first pay-per-view called Barely Legal in April. They had plans for that, and of course back then pay-per-view was everything for wrestling. If you were on pay-per-view, you were broadcast, not only throughout the country, but also throughout the world. Pretty much made you a big deal. And at the time, it was just WWF and WCW on pay-per-view, so this was a big step for them. And then on this night also, Lance Storm made his ECW debut. He defeated Balls Mahoney. ECW champion Raven retained his title, giving Dr. Death Steve Williams his first loss in the United States in like over 10 years. So that was a big thing, because he was a big star over in Japan, and he was kind of a big deal here, like in the 80s, but not like on a national like WWF level. You know, he's more like NWA type, but still was a big deal. His first loss in the U.S. because they kept that protected back then for those stars that were in Japan, like him and Vader and Stan Hansen, some of those guys that were big stars in Japan. They didn't like to lose a lot in the United States. I know it sounds stupid, but that, you know, actually meant a lot to the people in Japan. Like, you know, so anytime one of their, you know, the U.S. stars come over to Japan, it's a big deal. And anytime they lost in the United States, it was big news over there. And you know, it was important to them because that's how they made their money. Is, you know, the higher up on the card, especially in Japan. But anyway, you know, like I said, Raven gave him his first loss in over 10 years. And it was actually on this night that the Dudley Boys, as everybody knows them, Bubba Ray and Devon, actually formed a team. They had been brothers, and there had been all kinds of Dudleys in ECW back then. But they were on opposite sides. Bubba Ray Dudley was like the, you know, a good guy. Devon was a bad guy. And, you know, and Spike was there at the time, and he was a good guy. He was, you know, him and Bubba were teaming. Well, they actually, Bubba Ray actually turned on Spike this night and joined Devon. And this was actually also the first night that they hit the 3D, the Deadly Death Drop, which, you know, probably one of the most iconic tag team moves of all time. They hit it for the very first time on this night against Spike Dudley. Also, ECW Tag Team Champions, the Eliminators, they retained their titles. They defeated RVD and Sabu. Sabu, my favorite ECW wrestler. And then in the main event, the Pit Bulls and Tommy Dreamer, along with assistance of a masked man, who they this is like a month storyline. They stretched out. Turned out the masked man was Rick Rude, but they defeated the Triple Threat in a 6-man tag team match, and this was Brian Lee, Chris Candido, and Shane Douglas. The Triple Threat I remember the most was Shane Douglas, Bam Bam Bigelow, and Chris Candido. And then Lance Storm was kind of like a satellite member of the group, where him and Chris Candido were like tag team champions, but were like reluctant, sort of like the RVD and Sabu thing would be, where they were, you know, they weren't friends. But in this, they were more enemies than anything, and they just happened to keep winning and keep the tag team titles. But anyway, also you got to add Francine in there as a member of the Triple Threat. But when we were talking about the WWF, they had their 13th In Your House. It was In Your House 13 Final Four. It was February 16th from Chattanooga, Tennessee. On this event, WWF Intercontinental Champion Rocky Maivia, of course better known now as The Rock, retained his title, defeating Hunter Hearst Helmsley, better known now as Triple H. He still was being called Hunter Hearst Helmsley. He was like the blue blood, you know, that whole thing. It was a little bit before. It was before DX. You know, it was a few months before the whole DX. You know, he'd start teaming with Shawn Michaels type, you know, and all that stuff. And the Rocket Maivia actually just won the title 3 days earlier from Helmsley on Raw. The main event was a 4 corners elimination match for the vacant WWF title. And the story behind this is the match was originally set to be a #1 contender match to see who would face Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 13. And it came about because, you know, normally, almost every year now, whoever wins a Royal Rumble gets the WWF title shot at WrestleMania. Well, this year, Stone Cold actually won the Royal Rumble, but he'd actually been, you know, and he eliminated Bret Hart at the end. But he was actually already eliminated and came back in because the referees didn't see it. And, you know, the WWF president, Gorilla Monsoon, was like, well, we can't take the win away from him, but we're also not going to give him that automatic title shot. You know, it wasn't just Bret Hart that was cheated. It was also the other 2 people in the Final Four of the Royal Rumble, which is why this is called the Final Four, Vader and The Undertaker. So it was all 4 of them, you know, and Stone Cold had been eliminated while they were still in the ring, so it was only fair to give all of them a shot. And like I said, it's supposed to be #1 contender match for Shawn Michaels, but a funny thing happened on the way to this pay-per-view. The famous Shawn Michaels lost his smile promo on the special edition of Thursday Night Raw. I think it was like a dog show or something. They always kicked Raw off the air on some Monday nights a year, 2 or 3, for a dog show or tennis or something. But anyway, supposedly Shawn Michaels' knee was hurt so bad, and he had to have surgery and didn't know if he'd ever be able to wrestle again, so he had to give up the title. But instead of talking about his knee problems and everything, he went into talking about how, you know, just being the champion, he hasn't been able to, you know, he hasn't been himself, and of all the things he's lost his smile the most. And he was supposed to talk about his knee. This is a famous story in wrestling. But the supposed reason this was all done is because Shawn Michaels was supposed to go on and face Bret Hart, who was supposed to win the Royal Rumble, or win this match actually. He was supposed to face him at WrestleMania, and Bret Hart was going to win because the year before was that famous 60-minute Iron Man match where Shawn Michaels and the boyhood dream came true when he beat Bret Hart for the title. Well, supposedly Shawn Michaels didn't want to do the same thing for Bret Hart, and of course this was, during the time when him and Bret Hart were at odds, and of course that would all come to a head at Survivor Series that year. After Shawn Michaels had come back, he found his smile again. But, and the whole Montreal screw job where Bret Hart was leaving, but, that's all for another time. I already talked about that, and a million people have talked about that. But, yeah, that was supposedly why... I think Shawn Michaels still contends that it was his knee, and he didn't, he was in a bad place mentally anyway because he was on drugs and everything. And of course, everybody knows his story, how it turned out. He ended up retiring from a back injury following next year's WrestleMania, and then after 4 years came back and had almost another 8 years, big run in the company, and became Christian and completely turned his life around and got off all the stuff he used to be on. So it ends up being a good story, but at the time, it was, like I said, it's supposed to be a number one contenders match, so the match ended up being actually for the title. And so Bret Hart won the title, or won the match that night, won the title. But the next night on Raw, he was, the champion was supposed to face Psycho Sid. And then Bret Hart ended up losing the title to Psycho Sid that very next night, thanks to Stone Cold getting involved and costing Bret the match. So that ended up setting up Sid as champion, defending against Undertaker in the main event of WrestleMania 13. But even more important than that, it had ended up setting up that Bret Hart Stone Cold match at WrestleMania 13, the submission match, with Ken Shamrock as special referee, and that was a so-called double turn where Stone Cold ended up turning into a good guy basically that night because he didn't tap out. He passed out because of the pain, and then Bret Hart ended up basically, it'd been going on for weeks where he was like whining and throwing a fit, but it pretty much that night submitted the fact when he turned into a bad guy, a heel in wrestling. So a lot of stuff taking place around this time period that set up a lot for the future. Obviously, Stone Cold becomes huge. You see the match with Rocky Maivia and Hunter Hearst Helmsley and who they'd become. So it really set up the next 4 years, during this time period. It was a pivotal time. Go back talking now about ECW. They had another event this month. It was ECW Cyber Slam. And this was a 2-day event in 2 different cities, and it was it was a fan convention before they were doing things like that. The Comic-Cons now, and the wrestling conventions and all that stuff now. That wasn't like an everyday thing back then. That was something new, and ECW was doing it. It was like an internet fan convention, but there were you actually go to there. It wasn't like, I don't think it was broadcast online, or maybe a portion of it was. The internet back in '97, I don't think it hold like a full internet broadcast, or if it could, it was probably not seen by many people. But the first night was held in Queens, New York, and in the main event, the ECW Tag Team Champions, the Eliminators, retained their titles, defeating RVD and Sabu in a tables and ladders match, and not a match like you think now, TLC match, tables, ladders, and chairs. This was literally just a match where you could use tables and ladders. There was pinfall, so they just called it a tables and ladders match. The second night was at the ECW Arena, and the first match was actually the main event from the previous night with the same result, that tables and ladders match. And in the main event of the second night, Sabu defeated Chris Candido. Then we'll head over to WCW and check them out, see what they're doing. Of course, this is, 97. We're in the midst of that huge surge of popularity. From July the previous year, the NWO was formed basically with, Hall and Nash was already there, but then Hogan joined them as the third man. So, in February, WCW is like rolling on with, all this interest, and of course, it would end up being, culminating pretty much with Sting versus Hogan, and that was a whole debacle. That was in December of this year. The couple debacles in a row towards the end of the year with the Montreal Screwjob in November in WWF, and then the WCW match with Hogan and Sting from the next month, which actually involved Bret Hart in that too. So a lot of crazy stuff going on toward the end of the year. But anyway, Super Brawl 7, February 23rd, from San Francisco, California. On this event, Syxx defeated WCW World Cruiserweight Champion Dean Malenko to win. Lex Luger and the Giant defeated WCW World Tag Team Champions, the Outsiders, Hall and Nash, to win the titles. Although the next night on Nitro, they stripped him of the titles and gave him back to Hall and Nash because supposedly Lex Luger didn't get medical clearance or something. It was just a bullcrap way from Eric Bischoff, who was had joined the NWO at this point and was also WCW president. Basically just a way to, oh, look like the good guys got one finally, and then titles go right back to the bad guys. But anyway, the main event, WCW World Heavyweight Champion Hollywood Hogan with Ted DiBiase and Vincent, if you remember him. Also known as Virgil from the WWF. One of the world's crappiest wrestlers of all time. Somehow found himself in like all the big angles. But anyway, he defeated Roddy Piper after Macho Man interfered and joined the NWO. And of course, the thing with the NWO is everybody would join them eventually. And then February 24th, which was the night after Super Brawl, but has nothing to do with Super Brawl, ECW invades Monday Night Raw. They were at the Hammerstein Ballroom in New York, and ECW basically invaded, although, obviously Paul Heyman was working with Vince at this time, and there would be talent trades, and then, Jerry Lawler ended up showing up on ECW. At the time, though, all of us fans were thinking, oh my God, how did they invade this and not get arrested? Why are these WWF wrestlers showing up on ECW, and they're just letting them in the ring? Of course, as a kid, you don't realize that obviously both sides had to be working together or the police would have stopped it. It never would have aired even. But yeah, they invaded Monday Night Raw. Sabu jumped off the Raw. Because back then, before they had the big screen, they were starting to get that. But at the smaller events, they had the big RAW, like the wooden letters, and Sabu jumped off of it. Although the joke that they always tell is he kind of fell off it. He was trying to jump, but it started to go out from under him, so he sort of just fell off of it. But yeah, this was starting the whole build towards that barely legal. And we'd find out later on that ECW and WWF worked together a lot, with stuff. But they definitely didn't work with WCW. They were the enemy. ECW would, and Vince would even give them money from time to time to help them keep going. So, it was kind of a little relationship there. And then one final event for ECW had this month, the big event, was ECW Mountaintop Madness, February 28th from Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. Never heard of that town. That's literally the town name, Jim Thorpe, Pennsylvania. It's the second and final Mountaintop Madness. The main event of this was also the main event of the second night of CyberSlam. It was Sabu defeating Chris Candido. And then there was another title change that happened this month, because I always try to give all the title changes. February 17th, Prince Iaukea, which a lot of people's like, oh, he's one of the worst wrestlers. Him and Alex Wright. I always remember them fondly from WCW around this time, because they'd always be on there. But anyway, Prince Iaukea defeated WCW World TV Champion Lord Steven Regal, or as we called him then, Lord Steven Wrinkle, for the title on Nitro. And then one final note of wrestling for this month. February 7th was the debut of Ernest the Cat Miller, which is like, he was friends with Eric Bischoff. He was big into karate and hadn't done anything with wrestling, but he ended up becoming one of the most entertaining guys. He was the James Brown ripoff, pretty much. But he was the first one in WWF to have the Somebody Call My Mama music before Brodus Clay got it. He had that, and he would come out dancing and pretend to be James. I think even on WCW, they even got James Brown to come to an event and have like a dance-off against him. He definitely was not one of the best wrestlers there, not by any stretch of the imagination, but he was so entertaining. He was one of my favorites. Him and Norman Smiley, the guy that screamed and did the big wiggle, was always in the hardcore matches even though you hated him. But he had obviously a lot of things going on in wrestling at the time. Alright, now I want to talk about some stupid stuff I did back then. It's like, haven't you already done that multiple times? Yes, here's some more. First of all, the dog wants to come up here. Say hi, Tiny. You gotta say hi in the microphone. And here comes another jealous one. Tails. Tails is jealous. Anyway, I was thinking about wrestling, and back then there was a couple things. I remember WCW. Back then pay-per-view was a lot different. Now I think I was talking last week about. Yeah, it was last week I was talking about the regular cable versus when they came up with the digital cable with the on-screen guides and being able to order pay-per-views. Well, digital cable to order pay-per-view, you got to hit buttons. You can set codes, which my parents should have done. Should have set codes so I couldn't order pay-per-views of all kinds. I'll just leave it at that. But before the digital cable, to order a pay-per-view for wrestling, first of all, they do a 30-minute, they call it free-for-all. I don't know if they call that for WCW, but WWF they did. This was before they had Sunday Night Heat, and nowadays the pre-show with their PLEs, where they have the pre-show and stuff. It's like a 2-hour thing, which is sometimes overkill. But anyway, they had these 30-minute things, some interviews with the wrestlers, showing the highlights of the main stuff, basically hyping it up, which they can do in 30 minutes. They don't need the full 2 hours they have these days. But anyway, when it came to WCW pay-per-views, we noticed that they would accidentally, because it's all through this cable box, and you got to call to order these things. You call the cable company. Our cable system, was Warner Cable in Cincinnati, which ended up being Time Warner, which ended up being the wonderful Spectrum now, which you might see this thing if Spectrum internet doesn't go out tonight. But anyway, the WCW ones, we'd find that sometimes they would actually either, I don't know if it was forget to turn it off or put it on accidentally, but there's a string of few months and months and months in a row where they would leave the WCW pay-per-view on, and we'd be watching just hope any minute we know they're going to turn it off, but they don't. So we actually get to watch the full WCW pay-per-views on Sunday nights. It was crazy. And a couple Saturday nights for their motorcycle events, the Road Wild shows. But anyway, I think it was sometime during I don't even know if it was this year or the year after, but they did the 30-minute thing, and we're at this point we're used to oh yeah, we're gonna get the pay-per-view for free, so we're all sitting down ready to watch, and and of course we're home by ourselves because our stepdad Marky Foe's at the bar, drunk probably, but we're ready for that free pay-per-view, and then all of a sudden it goes off and says to order call, and I was like, oh great. So obviously I can't call and order a pay-per-view on my parents' cable system, and by my, I was 13 at the time. They're not, or 14 at the most. They're not going to think I'm an adult ordering, so I'm not going to call and order because I would have got in trouble anyway. But I called and said the WCW pay-per-view is not on. It went off, and they're like, "Did you order it?" I was like, "No." Are you going to order it? I'm not allowed to, and I hung up the phone real quick. I had the audacity to call them and be like, "Hey, you forgot to leave this on accidentally again." like it was really gonna work. And of course, after that, it never was on free again. And later on, we had cable. After we moved out of there, digital cable had already been out, but where we lived, we didn't actually have a cable box. We just had. Back then you could just get the cable cord and you get whatever channel your TV goes up to. And back then the TVs went up to channel 70, 75 or something. So you didn't actually need a box then if you just had basic cable service. You just plugged the cord in, and then we'd have, we'd run splitters off that, so every room would have cable, and we'd only be paying $30 a month. But anyway, because you didn't have the cable box, you had no way of ordering pay-per-view. But we discovered on some of the higher channels, you could actually watch or really listen to pay-per-views. And again, I say pay-per-views of all kind, but they would be the ones with the squiggly lines. We didn't discover that until then. we'd had the digital cable for so long, and there was none of that stuff. But Discover without a box, there was the pay-per-view channels, and they're all squiggly. So we'd like listen to like 4 or 5 pay-per-views, just like literally listen to it. You barely could make out. Sometimes you could see the ring, but it mostly just squiggles, and it was like listening to it. Now they just came out with a Sirius XM channel, the WWE Radio, where they actually broadcast the events on there. And I prefer to watch wrestling if I can, but I think it would be pretty cool to actually listen to the events. Be like the old days of, you can't watch the pay-per-views, we're just going to listen to it. But yeah, along with when I would order pay-per-views later on and get in big trouble, I would also call the 900 numbers, wrestling and otherwise. Now, I'm not going to say what it is, but you know what I mean by otherwise. But a lot of times I would be calling the wrestling hotlines. I remember the number for WCW is 1-900-909-9900. I remember that number. I would call these wrestling hotline numbers, and because they would always say, "Oh, you hear this huge news about this wrestler coming in," or you watch WCW like, hear about this big backstage scandal over in the WWF, and it's like you think you're getting like this breaking news, and mostly you're just getting stuff they make up. You don't even realize it. And they talk forever and ever to get to it. And of course, it's like, I think it's like it's like $3 or $4 or something to call, and then each additional minute's like $1. So of course they're going to draw it out to keep you on there. But the thing I really liked is when they had trivia. They had like these trivia games, and of course they would go on for like 15 or 20 minutes, and you don't even think about it. You just be on the phone playing the trivia game. And then the little phone bill comes, and I say little, the big phone bill comes the next month, and all of a sudden you hear your name. The mail runs, they go out and get the mail, you're upstairs, you hear your name called, and you're like, oh, in that tone, you're like, oh no, I'm in for it now. It was like, it was the cable bill, or was it the phone bill? Man, I don't know how it is. I know I talked about like being abused and stuff, and that's separate. I guarantee the butt whippings and stuff I got from the things I actually did, I deserved. I separate that from abuse to I deserve that crap, because I was costing, I don't even know what, $50, $60 a month on these things, phone numbers and pay-per-views and stuff, and so I wonder they didn't call the police on me or something. Like, I don't know, I could be charged with a crime, but I should have been. But we were always doing all kinds of stuff to entertain ourselves anyway. I was thinking about my brother Travis. We would get on each other. Like, me and Josh were close because he was my next youngest brother, and also Josh and Travis were close because they were, because Travis was third of us boys. So it was like Josh was close with Travis and Josh was close with me. But the gap between me and Travis was like, Travis would like get on my nerves, and I was like at that certain like age to where, some of the stuff he was doing shouldn't have got on my nerves, but also at the same point he was doing stuff he knew would get on my nerves. But I remember a couple times like he would terrorize me at some, you would think like I would be terrorizing him because he was younger, and I did my fair share of that. Like, I would make Josh and Travis like wrestle, like make them wrestle, because I had nobody to wrestle with. They're tired of wrestling my pillows, to the point like my mom called the cops on me one time, just like as a way to scare me, to get me to stop, which worked for like 2 weeks. And I was like, come on, you guys need to wrestle. It wasn't like I was like, we were just like wrestling around on the bed or the floor or the couch or something. It wasn't like I was like taking them outside, giving them power bombs on the concrete. But anyway, Travis would terrorize me sometimes. Like, there was this dead raccoon that like got in the garage and died. Like a dead raccoon got in there and died. That makes sense. Was a zombie. Anyway, a raccoon had gotten there. I don't know if he was hurt or sick or what, but he died in there, and it stunk. Like, we didn't go to this garage a whole lot. Sometimes we would. Sometimes it'd be a couple weeks or even a month before we'd, anybody be out in the garage. So we found it, and it was stinky, and I had to drag it out of there and throw it away. And like, I was trying to, I don't know why I didn't just like tell my mom or something, or somebody to get it, but I thought it was my personal responsibility to throw this thing away. So I was trying to pick it up with sticks, and by this point it had, trying to get too graphic, but it had rotted, and parts were falling off of it, and maggots and all that stuff. Anyway, I'm like struggling to get this thing thrown away and couldn't do it, and I was just making a mess and making the smell worse. Travis just nonchalantly picks up a stick, walks over, so this is gonna be graphic, stabs the raccoon eye and holds it up, and I'm going, ah! And you can almost see the look on his face at my reaction, because he almost got this like sick evil smile and just literally came after, like walking towards me with it, and I take off running, and he takes off running, and he's chasing me up the street with a raccoon's eyeball on a stick, like literally 2 or 3 blocks later. Like, can you just imagine driving by or being a neighbor and watching this? Yeah, some idiot kid running up the street by smaller kids chasing him. He's got a stick with a raccoon's eye that's like oozing. Again, sorry for the graphic content. Like, that ain't the worst thing he did to me in that garage. Like, I got all messed up teeth now, but my first tooth problem I ever had was a chipped front tooth thanks to Travis. And he goes and he tells this story all kinds of different ways. But the real truth is, and there's another story after this that he even tells a different way. See, you tell one story, he just leads into another. Sorry. But, I don't remember what it was, but I think the garage was locked or something. And he wanted me to get something in there, or I was getting something, I don't remember what it was, but I was, reaching through this window, which I had to, like, stand up on this metal fence behind it to reach through. I don't know if I was trying to get all the way in there, or try to get something that I could reach in the window. Either way, I was, like, hanging in the window, and he all of a sudden pushes me, and I hit the freaking concrete ground, chipped my tooth. Oh, I'm surprised it didn't break the freaking thing. Like, it was terrible. But the next one, he tells, let me see here. See if I can find. Oh, I can't find it as an example, but I'm sure you know what I'm talking about. You guys know those things, they're called koozies. They have all kinds of different names. But, the little styrofoam, not even styrofoam, but little foam things you put around your drink. You get a drink and you put it in it as foam, and it's, it doesn't hurt or anything, okay? This was not what he hit me with. He swears to that's what he hit me with, and when I tell you what the injury was, you'll realize that he's full of crap. We also had some of these, I don't even know if they make them anymore, but they're a hard plastic, almost like just like a hard plastic cup with, they're hollowed out, and there might be foam in the, the inside part of it to keep it cold. It did a really good job of keeping it cold and was more sturdy than those foam ones, because they just fit around the can. This one your can sits in. He got mad at me about something. Can't remember what it was. I remember this thing was like pink with all kinds of different wild, the 90s colors. Fluorescent pink. And he launched it, and he hit me right here. And I've got an indent in my nose still, and you can't see it on camera because it's under the skin, but I can feel the indent. He hit me with that, busted it wide open. Blood was squirting everywhere. My mom had to do like a butterfly thing with a Band-Aid, because it didn't need stitches, but it needed more than just a Band-Aid across it. And I was mad because the next day was like the very final day of swimming. And this was 6th grade, I remember when this was. So this was the year before this actually happened. So I was 12 at the time. Or no, I was 13. It was hold on, wait a minute. No, I was 12, sorry. Yeah, I was 12 at the time. And, nope, I take that back. Sorry. It was this year. I was 13. It was probably around this time, maybe a couple months after. Sorry, I was confused there. I forgot that I didn't do swimming till 7th grade. Anyway, I actually learned how to swim that way. I'll tell you a little sidetrack story. I thought I could swim because, like, you could, when you're a kid, you don't go in like swimming pools a lot or anything. You think, oh, I can just get in there and swim. This looks easy. People just moving their arms. You don't see people dying all the time doing that in my head. So what do? First time I go to a public pool, I was visiting my dad in Price Hill, and we had these neighbors that I became friends with when I visited there. Their kids were kind of a little older, but I kind of just tagged along. I think one of them was like a babysitter, when Dad wasn't there, which wasn't often, but when my dad or my grandpa at the time wasn't there. But anyway, I went to the pool with them, and like I said, oh, anybody can swim. So instead of just getting in the water to test that theory out, I thought it was a great idea, and people seem to be having a lot of fun jumping off the diving board. So you can guess what happened next. I jump off the diving board, hit the water. Next thing I remember, I'm being pulled out by a lifeguard because I was drowning. Idiot. Anyway, back to this. I learned to swim actually in swimming class in 7th grade. I loved it because, you know, and I could go off the diving board. It wasn't a diving board, it was like a platform. But, you know, I could go off that even by the end of this class. But it was our last class. We were, you know, I ended up passing it anyway, you know, because I was excused. But, you know, it was the last class of the year. We were going to, you know, show off our swimming skills. And I was like, been practicing for a couple of weeks. You know, I was really good at swimming. You know, I was like, I can beat, you know, anybody. Well, I never got the chance because, like I said, Travis busted that open and had a Band-Aid on it, and I couldn't swim with the Band-Aid on, and, you know, it couldn't come off because, you know, it literally happened. I think that was a Monday. It happened the Sunday, you know, before. But he swears up and down it was this light foam thing. First of all, if you throw one of those, unless you're standing right next to somebody, you're not gonna hit him with it. And if you do, I don't see how it could even. I mean, it can't even give you a paper cut, so I don't see what it could do. He hit somebody right in the eyeball with it, wouldn't do nothing. But he hit me right here, split me open, blood was going everywhere, and he swears up and down to this day it was just a light foam thing that you just put your can in. Now, it was not. It was hard plastic. You don't bust somebody open with a little thin piece of foam. Anyway, that was the relationship with my brother Travis back then. I want to talk about some TV now. A couple big things happened around this time. February 9th, The Simpsons aired its 167th episode. And what was special about that is it was one more episode than The Flintstones, making it the longest running continuous cartoon of all time. Which, of course, this was 1997 and they're still going with The Simpsons. So they're on episode 808 at last count, because I think they're off season right now till, you know, next month. But yeah, the Simpsons are the longest running cartoon of all time. And then February 28th feels like a little piece of my childhood died that day, because the Wheel of Fortune retired its old board. If you're old like me, you remember back Vanna White used to have to do a lot of work. She had to walk over there and she had to literally turn each letter, if you remember that from the Wheel of Fortune. You know, anybody born in the 90s probably, or even after, are more familiar with the Wheel of Fortune, where she just touches the thing and they turn, you know, the touchscreen thing. That started February 28th of 1997. Up until then, you actually had to turn the letters, you know. So, like I said, a piece of my childhood died that day because, you know, they switched to all fancy, the all fancy touchscreen Wheel of Fortune board. And then one of my favorite cartoons growing up as a kid, one of like the darkest Disney cartoons, and it was on like, you know, it wasn't on the Disney Channel. It was later on, but obviously I didn't have the Disney Channel, so I didn't watch it there. But Gargoyles, also known as Gargoyles, the Goliath Chronicles. It ended after 3 seasons and 78 episodes. It started in syndication and then ended up on Saturday morning cartoons for the final season on ABC. This is, of course, after ABC and Disney had merged. I think Disney bought ABC, I think is what it was. You know, so all the Disney stuff, you know, had to go to ABC for Saturday morning, so they put Gargoyles on there. I love that cartoon. It was like one of Disney's like darkest cartoons. You know, it's not a typical, prototypical Disney type cartoon, but it was really great. I remember watching the afternoons all the time, like after school. But speaking of that, I want to look at a lineup for Nickelodeon at this time. It was, I just randomly picked a day of the month. Happened to be February 3rd of 1990. I put 94. Change that. 97. I did 94 last week. But yeah, February 3rd of 1997 was a Monday. So this was, you know, would be during, February 3rd obviously was, you know, I don't think it was a holiday, so I'm pretty sure we were in school. And like I said, I probably had cable at this time, so I probably was watching some of this. Obviously not the stuff during school, unless I just happened to randomly be home sick that day. You know, as a possibility. And there's also a possibility I wasn't really sick, although that came more, well, I was in middle school. That's when I kind of, we'll just say I faked sick this day, as I did many days. Anyway, we start with the Nickelodeon lineup, of course, at midnight, and during that time is Nick at Night. We got shows like Rhoda, Phyllis, the Betty White Show. I don't remember that. I vaguely remember it. I believe it was a show that happened. Was like in the. I think it was. I can't remember exactly. I'd have to look it up to see if it was a newer show or not. I want to say it sounds like a newer show. I don't think that Betty White had a classic Nickelodeon show, other than obviously the Golden Girls, which wasn't on Nick at Night, I don't think. So it might have been a newer show. I'm not exactly sure. But anyway, we got Happy Days, which is one of my favorites. And then something they did later on Nickelodeon, which a lot of channels did, from 2 to 4 a.m., and some channels went even longer than that. They had paid programming, those wonderful infomercials and boring crap that they put on when nobody's probably watching, before the days of all 24-hour cable networks. Then at 4 in the morning, we've got the Munsters, one of my all-time favorites. I love the Munsters. Taxi, Dick Van Dyke Show. And 5:30 in the morning, we start Nickelodeon off. It used to be at 6, but they were starting at 5:30 at this time. Mr. Wizard's World, a science show where I love Mr. Wizard. He was so calming. You get up in the morning, you watch Mr. Wizard. Later on, it would, when Mr. Wizard wasn't on at that time, I would watch TBS. I would watch the Munsters. They were on from 6 to 7. I'd watch that while I get ready for school. But originally it was Mr. Wizard's World I was watching. Learned so much from that. And at 6 in the morning, we start with some Nick Jr. shows. Probably the most well-known Nick Jr. show of all time, Blue's Clues. Then we got Gullah Gullah Island, another favorite of mine. At 7 in the morning, Wienerville, the crazy puppet show hosted by Mark Wiener. No, it wasn't. Obviously they knew what they were doing with the title, but at the same time, they weren't just doing it just for, they said Wiener. Although, once we found the show, we never shut up about it, of course. I probably got in trouble at school for that. I want to go home and watch Wienerville. Alvin and the Chipmunks, the cartoon, from the 80s and, of course, the 90s. I love that cartoon. Then we got Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon. Classic. Then, like I said, this is Nick Jr., because Nick Jr. was actually created to go from, early in the morning until 2 p.m., around 2, some schools start letting out. Ours was always like 3. But, but this was the part of the day when, kids would be home, sometimes with their parents or with babysitters or daycare or whatever. But, the younger kids, so Nick Jr.'s for them, so that's what they would have on. And they had some great stuff on there. Stuff that would also be on regular Nickelodeon, like one of the very first Nicktoons of all time, Rugrats. Then they had The Busy World of Richard Scarry, which was originally a cartoon on the Showtime channel, the cable channel, just like HBO, where you got to pay for it. But I love The Busy World of Richard Scarry, and I remember reading all the books. Rupert, which I don't remember seeing too much of that. Muppet Babies is one of my favorite things of all time. Allegra's Window, another great Nick Jr. show that came out in the mid to late 90s. And then Gullah Gullah Island again. Little Bear, that I love that. Of course, I first started reading the Little Bear books, and then the TV show. That show is so calming. The music in it and the narration. That's something like I can watch nowadays, and it just calms me. And then we got Blue's Clues again. Busy World of Richard Scarry again. Papa Beaver's Story Time I really wasn't watching, because at this time I was 13, so I really wasn't watching Nick Jr. even during the summer months when it was on. I wasn't watching many of the Nick Jr. stuff, the new stuff anyway, so I never really watched Papa Beaver's Story Time. And then we got Looney Tunes on Nickelodeon again. As you see, it was a Nick Jr. show, but also it's now on regular Nickelodeon, because it's one of those cartoons that our grandparents watched, our parents watched, we watched, kids watched. Looney Tunes is one of those things that'll probably never die, although with nowadays stuff, they're trying to get rid of it and trying to cancel it, but that's a whole other subject. And then we've got Beetlejuice, the cartoon, which I didn't really care for the movie. I know, kill me now, just like with the Star Wars stuff. Didn't really care for the Beetlejuice movie, but I loved Beetlejuice cartoon. And then Tiny Toon Adventures, classic. Muppet Babies again, Alvin the Chipmunks, Inspector Gadget. That cartoon was one of my all-time favorites. The idiot Inspector Gadget and his niece Penny and her dog Brain would always solve the crime. The dumbest one on the show, even dumber than Inspector Gadget, was the police chief, Chief Quimby. He would always come up with these notes that would self-destruct. And he knew every freaking time Inspector Gadget, no matter where he hid, he would hide in garbage can and everywhere else. Inspector Gadget was always going to throw the self-destructing note and was always going to land on him, and he'd get blown up at the beginning to start every episode. Like, so people say how stupid Inspector Gadget was. No, Chief Quimby was the dumbest. And it just trickled down from there. That was probably one dumb police department. But even dumber as Dr. Claw, he ended up getting beat by a little 8-year-old kid and her dog. So, you know, it basically, besides Penny and Brain, that whole cartoon was nothing but idiots. Now that I think about it. At 5 in the afternoon, we get Are You Afraid of the Dark? The Tale of Station 109.1. I remember that one. It was like the haunted radio station. And then at 5:30, we got one of the great Nicktoons, Rocko's Modern Life. That show was crazy. Clarissa Explains It All. Another one that was always on Snick with Are You Afraid of the Dark? But of course, being Monday. And of course, being Monday, they probably showed on Monday the what was on Snick on Saturday nights. So that's probably the Are You Afraid of the Dark episode and the Clarissa episode. Then we got Tiny Toon Adventures again. One of the 3 original Nicktoons, Doug, followed by another one, like I just mentioned before, Rugrats. And then one that everybody likes to identify with that's a little bit younger than me but still grew up in the 90s is Hey Arnold. I really didn't care for it. I know a lot of people did, but I never really cared for it. That was on at 8, and then at 8:30 they switched back to Nick at Night. We got Happy Days, I Love Lucy, The Munsters, Mary Tyler Moore Show, Rhoda, Taxi, and then they end with The Odd Couple. So, great Nickelodeon lineup there. Not a lot of, you know, the regular Nickelodeon shows that I would be like, I don't really care for that. I would talk about a little bit about the TGIF lineup. Family Matters, they were in their eighth season, and it was actually their last season on ABC. Of course, they moved to CBS next season with Step by Step, and you know, that experiment of having their own sort of TGIF on CBS never really worked. ABC's after a couple years never really recovered. You know, so it's kind of the end of the heyday of TGIF was this season. Sabrina the Teenage Witch's first season was on there, and they had, of course, 7 seasons. On like 2 different, you know, towards the end of their run, they were on different networks. You know, sort of, you know, the time period when they got Sabrina is kind of when they started dying, because I think the next season they had like 2 or 3 other supernatural type shows with Sabrina plus Boy Meets World, and Boy Meets World was always my favorite. I'm going to talk about that now. They were in season 4 of 7, and the first 2 episodes of the month were a 2-parter, and one of the ones I remember the most as a kid. It's called A Long Walk to Pittsburgh. It's where Topanga's parents move. You know, they live in Philadelphia, and they're moving, so not, you know, she has to leave her school, all her friends, and of course Corey. So she ends up running away at the end of that first. I think at the end of the first episode. Yeah, I think that was like the cliffhanger. And then, you know, and then she, of course, you know, she's in trouble for that. She ran away, and she had to go back. But then her aunt actually stepped up and decided, you know, to let Topanga live there so she can finish out her, you know, her school year in the middle school at, you know, in Philadelphia with all her friends, and of course Corey. But you know, I don't know if that was ever. I'm guessing it was probably the plan all along. I don't know if they ever planned to write Topanga out. I think they just made that as an episode, like, to cause, you know, because, you know, everybody's talking about Boy Meets World at school. Everybody the next day was like, oh my God, Topanga's gone. What's Corey gonna do? Is she gonna be off the show? You know, of course. And, you know, next week it resolves. And then the other episode this month is where Eric finds out his new girlfriend, because almost every episode starts with Eric with a new girlfriend. He ends up finding out she has a kid, and he thinks he's mature enough to try to be a father, and of course he finds out he's not, because, you know, I think he's like 18 at this point, you know, and he, you know, this girlfriend, not like super older than him, but, you know, maybe a year or 2, but, you know, he thinks he can be a father to this kid, and finds out, you know, he's not ready for that at all. But speaking of, you know, stuff, you know, we watched as a kid on TV, we'll go into something we did as kids on TV. Video games, obviously huge, and a game that came out this month that we didn't actually get to play until a couple years later, but once we got it, we were constantly playing was Mario Kart 64. It was released in February of '97. My favorite of all the Mario Kart games, I know the ones that came out with like the Wii, and I haven't played any for the Switch, but like the Wii U, those are, you know, obviously more advanced and more tracks and everything, but for me, nothing will beat Mario Kart 64. It was a sequel to Super Mario Kart for Super Nintendo, but it's, like I said, my favorite of all time. It's known for the different fun tracks that it had, and of course all the power-ups. You know, you'd hit the blocks, or you get the, you know, the little dice. I'm confusing that with Mario Party, but you get the objects that you would, you know, go through the track and get, and there'd be stuff like bananas where you can make your opponent slip on it. There'd be mushrooms where you could go faster. The lightning bolt, which like shock everybody. But the one that everybody hated, well, you hated if you were in first place, was the dreaded blue turtle shell. Because, you know, they had the red one, which would, like, you know, seek out person in front of you. The green ones would you'd throw them. I think you had to be on target with those. The red ones, I think, would like hit whoever's in front. But the blue ones, normally you got them if you're in last place, and they like heat-seeking missile right to first place. You could almost never avoid those. So if you were in first place and someone got that blue shell, you were in for it. And I think I read later on that the reasoning behind that was because it kind of like to keep it one kind of to where someone didn't get out in first and like run away completely, but also because of graphical things and visual. You know, it was hard to have, you know, with different players, have one be so far ahead. I think that's what, I don't know if it's a rumor, but that was supposedly the reason they created that, so that way there wouldn't be somebody that was like super far ahead and basically off the screen, but having to keep it on the screen to see, obviously. But anyway, that one would cause all kinds of problems. But me and Josh, Travis, and Clint, we played the crap out of Mario Kart 64. Just like it was one of those games that, you know, I don't remember how many tracks they had, like 8 or something like that, maybe even 6. I think it was 8. But it never got old. Like, you could play it over and over again, even just play against the computer, as we called it. We always called it the computer. Nowadays they call it the AI or whatever. But yeah, it was just one of those things that just never got old. And between that and Mario Party 2, those were like some of our favorites in Nintendo 64. One day I'll do a countdown. I just did one of my top Sega Dreamcast games of all time. I'm definitely going to do one of my top Nintendo 64 games of all time. That'll be sometime in the future. But anyway, I want to end the episode talking about music. Just taking a look at the music charts. Of course, I wasn't listening to pop music at the time. I would, and with the next year, but at the time I was just listening to country music. But I still like to give the charts just to show where we're at in the time. The Billboard Hot 100, of course. The big song was "Unbreak My Heart," which, of course, I think I've heard since then. I don't even know if I heard the whole thing, but obviously snippets of it. But that was "Unbreak My Heart" by Toni Braxton was #1 for 3 weeks, plus all of January and all of December the previous year of #96 for a big 11-week total. So that was a huge song. And then "Wannabe" by Spice Girls, like their first big hit, was #1 for 1 week, plus 3 weeks of March, so a 4-week total for that one. And then, of course, my music, the country music, it sounds like it's from the country. I don't know which country it's from. These days, I don't. It don't even sound like it's from this planet, but I'll try not to get too much into today's music, because I'll get going. If you've seen this before, you know me, I'll get going. Speaking of that, I do have an album coming out. My album, I try to make them sound like something that would have been released in the 90s. You're not going to be hearing fake snapping and rapping in it. Trust me, you wouldn't want to hear me try to rap anyway. I guarantee it would be absolutely terrible if I even tried. But anyway, that album comes out September 15th. Hopefully, if I get it all recorded. I still got like 8 songs to do. It's a 22-song album. I stupidly decided on that total for some reason. Anyway, back to the country countdown. "Nobody Knows" was a big song by Kevin Sharp. It was #1 for 1 week, plus 3 weeks back in January for 4 weeks total. And I think there was a pop or R&B version of this. I can't remember I know there was, but I think it was the Tony Rich Project was the name. I don't even know if that was a guy's name, if it was the name of like their manager, a group name. Anyway, I ended up hearing that years later. It was, but I believe it was out around the same time. I don't know which one was first, but it was, obviously a big song. Kevin Sharp didn't have a long career. He ended up, I think he had leukemia or something. He ended up passing away sometime in the 2000s, I think. But I mean, even then he was, I believe he had chemotherapy because I remember he was bald, and it was like, it was a big story, but he wasn't just like a pity number one just because, it was like a Make-A-Wish type thing. He was a really talented artist, and I don't mean like a Make-A-Wish thing trying to like derogatory, like I was basically trying to say it was like, they wasn't just saying like, oh, the song's okay, but we're going to give it number one because you got cancer. It wasn't pity, it was, and again, like I said, I'm not saying people with cancer get pity things. It's just, you know how it is these days with all the participation trophies, and the people feel sorry for people when people in reality would just like to earn. I've heard from, like, I know I'm going way off here, but from some people that are just like given things because they have a disease or something. Heard them say many times that they don't want to be like recognized because they got this disease. They want to be recognized for doing something. So no, that was a whole tangent there. But anyway, that was the number one song, Nobody Knows by Kevin Sharp. And then a number one for 2 weeks was Mark Chestnut, It's a Little Too Late. That's a really good song. And then we end the month with one of my favorite Brooks and Dunn songs. It's not like one of their most well-known, even though it was a number one. That was A Man That's Lonely. One of those power songs that Ronnie Dunn sings so well. But this has been a fun one to talk about. I've kind of gotten... but you never know what you get from this podcast. But you will know what you get next week. Episode 89. And staying in 1997, actually. Like I said, I randomly picked these things, so you never know what it's going to be from one week to the next. But we're jumping 8 months into the future. We're going to be going to October of 1997. So I'll definitely be talking about some horror movies. Whenever I do October for a year, I like to kind of go back through that year and pick out the horror movies that I like that came out that year and kind of do like a little mini rankings thing. I will be doing a year-end review for each year once I do a full complete 12 months of like everything. It'll be the top horror movies or top movies in general that come out. Top songs, things that won awards, like award show type stuff. There's all that type of stuff. General memories of the year, that type of stuff. But anyway, next week, 1997, 89th episode. I can't believe I've done 89 of these. It'll be our 10th trip through 1997, and I was still 13 at the time, obviously. But at this time, I was in my second year of 7th grade. So, this time I'm in my first year. I fail, obviously, because I'm an idiot. Not because I didn't know the work, because I didn't do the work. But yeah, I was still 13, but I was still 13 in the same grade, but for the second year. So had all different teachers too, because our middle school was different. You had clusters. There was red and blue clusters. So when I started, I was in the red cluster, 6 red and the 6 blue. Just a way to separate them, because it was like 5 elementary schools feeding into one middle school. So it was a way to keep them separate, but also you would be going through the year with some of your same classmates. So it's almost like each cluster, you had your friends in that cluster, to where you do projects and classes with, and you'd be familiar with them more than the other clusters, even though you probably had some friends from elementary school. Anyway, I went from 6 red, and the next year you're supposed to change to blue and then back to red. Well, I went to 6 red and then to 7 blue, but since I failed, they put me in 7 red. So, I've seen all the colors apparently. None of that matters. I'm just all over the place. Thank you guys for joining me, and we'll see you next time.
Tales from the 90's never die. In our hearts they testify. VCRs and mixtape spins, where every tale begins. Tales from the crypt, marathons, wrestling wars.